Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to talk about something called fierce civility. Think about that for a second. Fierce civility. Now, Eleanor Roosevelt said one time, we have to face the fact that all of us are going to die together, or we're going to have to learn how to live together. And if we choose to live together, we're going to have to talk. Now, she said this during the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's over 60 years ago. And what she said still applies today. That's what we're going to talk about. My guest today is my friend, Joe Weston. Now, Joe's an international facilitator. He's an author, a lecturer, a consultant, a coach, professor, and above all, he's an advocate for lasting peace. He has a career that spans over 30 years in the fields of conflict prevention, leadership, stress management, and communication. All pretty important topics, don't you think? He's a highly sought after thought leader. He's a trainer for individuals as well as corporations, government agencies, and nonprofits all over the world. Now, in his spare time, he just happened to release his book, Fierce Civility, Transforming Our Global Culture from Polarization to Lasting Peace. How'd this book do? Just achieved the #1 best-selling new release status in Amazon in 9 categories and the #1 bestseller in 5 categories. So if you have not ordered this book yet, do it now. Do it today. Joe, welcome to Life Altering Events.
Thank you, Frank. I love that. That's great. I'm going to take you with me on the road. How's that?
Yeah, I'll be your opening act.
My opening act. I think you'd be a great opening act. I think people would. I'd be honored.
Appreciate that, my friend. Joe, one of the first questions I got to ask you is, I hear it all the time. What happened to civility? When did we lose it? And did we ever have it? What do you say?
That's a great question with many pieces to it. I would say, how would I say that? Did we ever have civility? I think, whatever happened to it. Civility served a certain group of people. And what we're finding now is that civility is not serving us in terms of meeting the challenges of our time. And I think that's why I talk about fierce civility. One of the chapters in my book, the title is From Chronic Niceness to Fierce Civility. And that you could say that a lot of the bullying and the lack of civility and the oppression and the aggression and the ways and the cheating and the ways that we harm each other is causing the problems, but also the chronic niceness of just sitting back with a nice smile on our faces and allowing it to happen, or not knowing how to do it, or actually using that facade of civility and chronic niceness while we are saying harmful things is also contributing to the problem. So I would say that, yes, civility has run through human history, but I wouldn't call it civility. I would call it ethical truths, I would say. And in the book, I talk about that having studied many different religions and spiritual practice and indigenous traditions and ethical systems, I found 5 core guiding principles that have helped us as human beings be our best selves. And that's respect, dignity, which for me is about being valued, belonging, freedom, and collaboration. And that, to me, forms the core of what civility can be. But unfortunately, if you look at the definition of civility in the dictionary, you'll see that it has things like politeness, refined taste, and that is almost like a civility from Victorian times, from a privileged few. So I think what we're seeing today is the civility that we thought was civility is outdated because it's become elitist in a sense. And our current way of doing civility cannot match and overcome and challenge the intensity of the lack of civility we're currently seeing. And therefore, that's why I created this concept, fierce civility, that we can stand strongly in our core values and our core principles of respect and belonging and dignity, and at the same time match the bullying without becoming a bully. Because oftentimes what we see, we have two options. We either acquiesce, or the only way we think we know how to challenge the bully system is to become a bully. But basically all it's done is it's just transformed us into a bully. It's like the Borg, if you know Star Trek.
Yes.
It turned us into one of them. And the more we fight the system, the more we feed the system. So Fierce Civility is approaching that for many people who are feeling, man, I wish I had something that I can do. I wish I had some way to approach this, because our only options, and that's where this work is about breaking false polarities, is either to be aggressive or to be passive. And what Fierce Civility does is it alchemizes the two of them, and it cracks it open to create new options so that you can deal in the moment. And that is what Fierce Civility, it's a training. It's based on martial arts and martial arts trainings and sports trainings, where we can train ourselves to cultivate what I call the skills and strategies of the heart, to be able to meet resistance and meet the challenges in a way where we make sure we're safe, we stay authentic to our hearts and ourselves, and we appeal to the hearts of others. We meet them where they are and slowly invite them into a conversation to say, listen, we all think what's going on is not working.
That's right.
And that's really where it comes back to Eleanor Roosevelt's quote. She says, we're either going to die together or we're going to learn to live together. There's no more options. And that was more than 60 years ago, as you said, and it's only gotten worse. The idea of win-lose, the idea of a political party winning and then all is well, or all of that, that's a luxury. That's a privilege that we can't afford anymore. You know, I take it further in the book and I say, you know, where Eleanor Roosevelt says, we either all die together or we learn to live together. I say we either all win together or we all lose together. There's no more win-lose. That's how drastic the situation is now. And I have hope.
And that's interesting. Let's go there, because civil discourse, discussion, debates, it's all been replaced with name calling and hostile rhetoric and now active violence. How do you maintain hope? Why are you hopeful?
Because I am seeing, I'm involved internationally, you know, with groups around the world that are committed to overcoming this, that are committed to global peace, that are committed to mitigating the effects of climate change, that are income inequality, climate migration, conflict, oppression. And I see that I'm working with organizations in the United States. There are more organizations than the media will let us believe, because it's not sexy for the media. The media, you know, just like any corporation, just like any entity that needs to earn money, it needs to earn money, and it knows that conflict sells. Conflict is sexy, and we're wired for that. It's easy for human beings to get into our reptilian brains, to get into our fight, flight, freeze response, to get into this oppositional place. We see it in sports. I mean, from an entertainment perspective, it's great. We love watching sports. We get very excited. We get fully passionate and engaged. Mm-hmm. We see it in our films. Like Hollywood is all built on this idea of there's always got to be a victim, a hero, and a villain. And so, and what's unfortunate is that we have taken sports, the dynamic and energetic of sports and Hollywood and TV, of a winner-loser concept, and we've taken it into all aspects of our life, into, you know, you saw that in the 80s with the level of greed in business, of cutthroat. Basically, the only way I can win is if you lose, and I will easily step over you to get further. And that hasn't gone away. And we see that in politics. This idea that you know, I celebrate my opponent's losses, which is, if you think about it, tragic. But we celebrate that, and we get suspicious when people want to work together. But I believe that there are more and more people who are at that point where they're saying, we've got to do something. So that gives me hope. What gives me hope is just talking to people and meeting people who want to see it different. What gives me hope, and I say this in the book, at the beginning of the book, I say, I believe in the human spirit. So I may not be optimistic, Frank, for what might be unfolding at the moment, but I have hope. And what I say in the book is I have to believe that yesterday at least one person out of 8 billion people pulled a person out of a burning car to save their life. I have to believe that sometime today someone brought breakfast to a neighbor knowing that they couldn't afford to, they didn't have food, and without being asked. I have to believe that someone tomorrow, somewhere in the world, in the middle of a heated conversation will say, now that I see it from your perspective, I'm willing to shift my perspective. Out of 8 billion people, I have to believe that there's at least one person a day who does that. And that gives me hope.
That's an outstanding way to look at things. It's simply, it's a one step at a time, and nothing happens in a vacuum. It's a bottom up type of an approach.
Yeah.
Now, Joe, you've been called in some very contentious situations. Now, when you walk into a room, or you're going to be a facilitator, how do you calm that situation? The people are at each other's throats. What do you do?
Well, I won't bring them into a room until they're ready not to go at each other's throats, right? So there's a lot of work that would go on separately, and what I would do is first offer some teachings in how to regulate the nervous system. So that's an important part of the book. Frank, as you know, one of the most important things that I'm bringing in is the transformational power of the heart, and understanding what we're all going through in these extreme times. We're in, for years now, in all of my teachings and lectures, I've started by saying, the bad news is that all the systems as we know them are crumbling. The good news is that all the systems as we know them are crumbling.
That's right.
And we're in this state of transition, which is and William Bridges, I bring him into the book. He's an American thought leader who talked about change and transition, where change is external, transition is internal. And that the challenge is not the externals often, it's the internals, the psychological effects of what change is bringing to us. And each one of us, based on our psychological makeup, our background, our level of privilege or whatever, will respond to change in a different way. And what we're seeing with the heightened level of uncertainty, with the pandemic, with the economic strife and uncertainty, with the climate shifts, we are personally and collectively in a nervous system dysregulation. And I believe that, I've been involved with think tanks and talking to people where organizations have spent millions of dollars to come up with solutions to our problems. They're great solutions on paper, but I believe they're never going to actually come to fruition because we're in a state of dysregulation and in trauma. So the core causes of what we're going through right now, the breakdown of civil discourse, the breakdown of civic engagement, the breakdown of personal agency, the breakdown of independent critical thinking, is a heightened level of trauma response, which creates a threat response. So anything that we perceive as different or new, we're going to see as a threat, maybe even to our lives. And I believe that if we don't address that first, we're never going to see solutions. So the book is all about the skills and strategies of the heart of training yourself, like I said, martial arts and sports training, to be able to be in the heat of conversations, to navigate the twists and turns without getting reactive yourself, and supporting people in helping them create a safer space and a space of more trust. So to answer your question, with a contentious situation, I would first offer some of those teachings to help keep the nervous system regulated. Because when our nervous systems are dysregulated and we're in that threat response, we shut down our hearts. And that's what I would say is what we're going through. We've seen in the last 10 years, 20 years, an ongoing continuation of us closing our hearts, not only to people that we don't know that are different, but even to family members who hold different views. It's remarkable to think about, if you think about it, and that's one of the solutions, is to just say at a Thanksgiving dinner or something where Uncle Vinny or something is there and has his views on politics, to just be able to appeal to the heart and say, listen, I wish we could go back to the way we were. So it's appealing to the heart. So in that contentious situation, it's helping people learn how to stay regulated, getting people to the point where they will feel safe enough to get into the room together. Once that happens and you get them in the room, then I ask a really critical question, which is, do you want to see a win-win solution here? Knowing that that means you're probably going to have to give something up. And that can take months. That could take years, right? But the beauty of that is that in the conversation of why they wouldn't, already things are being revealed. So it's a very slow, organic process of slowly peeling away the things that are harming, that are causing people to not be in right relationship. And in the 6-step pathway of hope, which I really go into, step number 2 is healing and reconciliation. So that's an important part of getting to win-win solutions.
Absolutely. It's what, ladies and gentlemen, what you're going to love about this book is it's the training and the steps to get yourself in a position to be able to deal with the situation. Is that right, Joe? You talk about changing the neural pathways in your brain. And people say, what are you, a neuroscientist? How do you do that?
With practice and patience and perseverance. So here's an important part of this, and I want to offer this to anyone who's listening or watching. People don't change, they transform, right? So we want to try to find new solutions to our current problems. That's really the key, and that's really what the essence of the book is. How do we get reconciliation? How do we bridge? How do we heal some of the trauma we have? And how do we get to new solutions? The time is ripe for new solutions because of what we were saying, because the systems are crumbling. The new solutions may not have emerged yet because they need people with different voices. We need diverse voices to come in. So the first thing to think about is that if you're with Uncle Vinny or whomever, is that you can't expect them to change. I would say that that's violence. And you can see systems, oppressive systems that have tried to change people. Or in relationships, just one-on-one, I want you to be like this. Mm-hmm. And people don't change, they transform. And there's a difference. Transform is a longer process. And what transforms are viewpoints, habits, and patterns. So I can still be me and still transform my viewpoints. By transforming my viewpoints, I then take on new habits, which ends up in new patterns. People will not change their viewpoints, habits, and patterns if there's not some level of safety and trust. So it's a slow process, and that's what neurobiology is. That every time you think something new, every time you do something new, synapses in the brain connect, which creates a pathway. It's like a computer circuit, right? Mm-hmm. Computers modeled after the brain. And you have a new circuit in the brain. And the beauty, it's called neuroplasticity. And that will go on to the day you die. So even in your 80s, you can change. Even Uncle Vinny can change its habits and patterns. Every time you do that same thought or that same behavior, the neural pathway you've created gets stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger until it becomes a new habit. And you see that happening. That's why you see some politicians who are very tricky. They're really good at that, as they keep repeating themselves over and over again. And I'm not saying whether that's good or bad. It's not for me to judge. I can assess and say it's a clever strategy that if you say something often enough, the neural pathways get connected. And if people aren't tapped into their authentic, independent, critical thinking, if they're in a stress response, they will grasp onto any thought that they hear often enough and start believing it's true.
That's a great point, Joe. I see one of the things that's occurred in the last 4 or 5 years is listening to only things that support your point of view. I went through rumor and propaganda training in the military, in the Air Force. And one of the things that they said, a lie, a mistruth, a distortion, whatever it is you want to call it, if it is said often enough and loud enough, it will be perceived as being true.
Yeah.
Correct? So now it's getting people out of that mindset that they're just bombarded with, this is the way it is. This is the only way it can be. This is how it has to be. Now your training allows them to step back. Okay, let's see what's going on here. What's the source?
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah, it's about, it's about understanding the power of the heart, right? So when we're in our heads, when we're in our intellect, we get caught up in mental constructs. All of the problems we are facing now is because of mental constructs, meaning the way we label people, the way we delineate people, the way we do a system, an economic system that favors some and others. That's all person made. That didn't grow out of the ground. Mother Nature didn't create that. That's something that's just simply an agreed upon a construct that human beings have done. And because of the internet and because of the pandemic, we got very isolated and we're in our silos. We are now so focused on getting a lot of our information through the internet, which is all just images and intellectual ideas. And we have forgotten that we as human beings, that we resonate with the heart. We have an electromagnet. The heart has an electromagnetic field. It's been proven through the Heart Math Institute and other scientists that the electromagnetic field of the heart is 5,000 times stronger than the brain. And that the heart influences the brain more than the brain influences the heart. And so we as beings, our whole development is based on heart resonance, right? The first thing that you do with a baby is you put it on a parent's body to create connection. That's our first instinct, that sense of belonging. So the work is about getting out of our heads and into our hearts, because in our hearts, that's where our wisdom is. We've got our intellect here, but where our wisdom resides is in our heart. Where in our heart is common sense, right? We can have if you're in an urban environment and you walk down the street, there's a homeless person. We instantly go through the mental constructs to create separation. Well, they should have gotten a job. Well, I can't afford. We go through all of these things so that we don't have to engage. Again, not good or bad, it's what we do. But when we stop for a moment and get into our hearts, we come back to common sense and we just say, oh my God, there's a human being who's suffering. And that's what's going to lead us to action. As long as we stay in our heads and as long as we keep all of our arguments in opinions and ideas, we're never going to see solutions. But when we drop into our hearts, we come into a deeper resonance and we come back to common sense. We get back into our bodies. Because being in your heart, common sense means getting back to your senses, where your feet, right? So that is the key. The key is the body and the heart. We're shut down from that. And when you're in a trauma response, you don't have a connection to your heart or your body. You're just basically in that tight threat response. So that's how I would see that. If you want to continue the stagnation of the polarization, if you want to continue their arguments, then just argue points, right? A lot of the key of the book is what Fierce Civility explores that it's not just the what, it's also the how. Fierce Civility is not, I don't go that much into issues and things like that. How can you get Uncle Vinny to believe this, right? That's not what it's about. It's about how can you be more skillful in creating the conditions for you and Uncle Vinny to shift your viewpoints, get back to connection. And that one of the key components of the book and solutions to our stagnant polarization is finding alliances in surprising places. That's really the key. Mm-hmm. That because of a lot of the book is understanding that the polarization creates stagnation. Like I use the image of two rams.
Yes.
Ramming each other. They just ram each other and they're just pushing and pushing and pushing and not getting anywhere and just wasting a lot of energy and resources and talent and time. And that's what we're seeing playing out. So one of the core tenets of the book is the power of the pivot. Is how do you pivot out of that stagnation and get from disorientation to orientation, to reorientation.
It's a great point. One of the things I see, Joe, in dealing with in the corporate world is we're finally starting to understand that respect. I read this somewhere and I said this in a meeting. Respect is like air. As long as it's there, nobody thinks about it. As soon as it's gone, that's all anybody can think about. And as soon as someone feels disrespected, the conversation is over. The topic is done. Now it's about maintaining dignity. So a lot of what I've read in your book is teaching yourself how to create respect for the other party while not acquiescing to what it is that they have to say. Is that a pretty accurate statement?
Yeah. So this is the work I do in corporations and organizations, and how, the book on this pathway to hope, at the last step of the pathway is creating a blueprint for lasting peace. And that could be global, but it can also be a thriving work culture. It could be a thriving family system. And when I do work in organizations, the basis of that is creating cultures of mutual empowerment, which is really key. And and I talk about inclusive leadership, and that's not just around diversity in terms of different kinds of people, but it's creating an environment of a safer environment where there's more trust. And I actually use a quote by former Secretary of the Treasury Paul O'Neill, who says, "People have discretionary energy, and they will give it to you if you treat them with dignity and respect." And that what I've been training people, and that's and even with the combat veterans I've worked with, and corporate leaders and executive directors, that what's trending now is leaders are being expected to lead from a place of vulnerability and transparency. The younger generations are requiring it, where we're breaking this idea of the hierarchical of top down, in a sense, where we're creating more a circular approach to leadership. And that you can see, because the whole key of the work is to get more buy-in, whether you're in a contentious situation, whether with your Uncle Vinny, whether it's in an organization, how can you get people to contribute more, to be part of solutions, to bring in their talents, not just dial it in. And the more that they feel seen and respected and valued, the more that their own personal, their creative freedom is activated, and then you will achieve that goal.
Absolutely. That's a terrific point. I interviewed Dr. Edward Hess from the University of Virginia. And one of the things he said was the pandemic recreated the function of manager. Okay, you don't need to be sitting in the room watching people. Manager now becomes facilitator, enabler. And as I read your book, I said, oh my God, that's right on point. That's exactly it. That's the shift.
Yeah, the shift. And yes, that the scaffolding, and I talk about this in the book, that in the blueprint of lasting peace, that the scaffolding for a thriving society or work culture, if you think of scaffolding, you have the individual joints, that's the individual, and you have the connective bars, that's the interpersonal relationships. That because of post-pandemic and all of that work is different, that to create a thriving, resilient work culture, you have to find ways to help the individual thrive physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, and also create good systems of communication. And I believe that wholeheartedly, that the more inclusive the work culture is, the more you must have an agreed upon system of accountability. That's both fierce and civil. Because you don't have the system itself, right? From the military, the system itself is a built-in accountability system, right?
Exactly.
You basically must obey, and if you don't, you're out or you get reprimanded. When you take that away, then you have to create that interpersonally. And we don't have those skills yet.
You're absolutely right. We don't. And the other thing I loved about your book is accountability is not placing blame. Expand on that.
Wait, what did you say? It's
Accountability is not placing blame.
Right.
Your fault. You didn't get it done. What is accountability?
It's accepting the fact that one of the principles, my truth does not equal the truth, in the book is very important from a different context. But basically, it's that I can't possibly see all that I do and in any given moment. So in a sense, I can, in a healthy, mutual empowered work culture, I can rely on my colleagues to let me know things that I can't see. So in a sense, and that's in the first book I wrote, Mastering Respectful Confrontation, I talk about how confrontation is different from conflict, and that confrontation is any encounter, any difficult conversation, or any encounter that deepens relationship, brings individuals together, and empowers everyone involved. And that being nice, chronic niceness, is not the only way to deepen relationship and to empower one another. I would say that the most effective, long-lasting effects of creating deepening relationship is having the skills and the courage to have the difficult conversations in a respectful way. And what all you're doing is you're reflecting back. I'm noticing you're doing this. It's a typical feedback model. This is the effect it's having on me and the team or whatever. This is what I would need to make it more effective. And if we could learn those, I say that the language of power is the language of feelings and needs. The language of ideas and opinions, there's no power in that except just our own self-gratification. But if you can say, I'm noticing that you're coming too late to work, the effect is it's throwing off our meetings. That's a feeling, and I'm disoriented. That's a feeling. What I need is more reliability, right? It just cuts right through it, feelings and needs.
And that's perfect. It doesn't place blame. It's just saying, here's the situation. Here's a way to resolve the situation, instead of the old, when I was coming up, the guy pounding on the desk and yelling, which they thought was effective. It didn't work 40 years ago. It's certainly not going to work today.
No.
Absolutely not.
Well, yeah. I mean, can I tell a quick story?
Sure, absolutely.
And this is where the paradigm is shifting. Is that, a good friends of mine in Holland, I was visiting, and their son was around 8 at the time, and the whole system in Dutch is very different from America. But we were just having dinner, and the son was saying, or the mother was saying that she went to school to find out how the kid was doing. And part of that process, the parent then turned to the kid and said, well, now it's time for you to give your mother feedback. Which is interesting. That, that's very Dutch, more like.
Yes.
And she said, wow, some of the things I heard was kind of hard. And then we were all in a really lighthearted mood. And the father said in a fun way, give me some feedback. And the kids started giving him feedback. It wasn't very pleasant. And out of nowhere, the guy just started screaming. He banged the table. He said, how dare you disrespect me at my table? And it was very confusing and painful for the kid. He ran off. My friend, she ran off to take care of him. And that we were in a heated discussion, he and I. And basically he said, I can't treat me that way. And I used the power of the pivot. I used the work, and I said, so I have a question for you. What is more important for you, that your son respects you or that your son obeys you? And he said, obeys me. And I took a breath. I was fierce and I was civil. I looked him in the eye and I said, that is so incredibly lazy.
Wow.
And I didn't judge him or anything. I said, that is so lazy. And and that's the purpose of the Fierce Civility approach, the power of the pivot. I disarmed his resistance or his without disempowering him. And then he started saying, you know what? Now that I think of it, I learned that from my father. And my father left us when I was 10. So he's not a great role model. So why should I follow that teaching or whatever?
Exactly. That is a great story. That is a great story. Well, Joe,
that's a paradigm shift.
Absolutely. The power of the pivot is so important. It's let them say what they need to say, and then stay calm, and then pivot. Okay, how would you rather have it? What do you believe is a better way to go forward? And then now they have to think.
Yeah. You get pulled out of, because a lot of times we're so wired to go into the stagnation, and clever people will use it to keep us from finding solutions, right? That's what we're seeing. You see it on the pundits, the media, politicians,
Absolutely.
that they just know that as soon as we can get to a place where we're about to collaborate, someone throws in a false polarity, which gets us oppositional, and we've just lost the moment.
Exactly.
So it's constantly, so that's what the work is, and that's what the training is in the Fierce Civility book, is to notice as quickly when we get stuck in the false polarity, pivot out of it, get us back to right relationship.
Joe, this has been a fascinating conversation. We're just about out of time. What last words, what last advice do you want to leave with the viewers around the world?
What I think is important, and I bring this up at the beginning of the book, is to consider who's telling your story. I think right now we're in such a, I'll use the word crisis. We're really in an extreme time right now. If Eleanor Roosevelt was saying what she was saying more than 60 years ago, it hasn't gotten better. And the world needs each and every one of us who can really resonate from our hearts and really want to see inclusive, innovative solutions emerge for everyone. And I think it starts with asking, who's telling your story? Because we get so caught up in what media is telling us, what our government tells us, what our religious institutions tell us, our parents, and to do an investigation, to realize, wow, I'm still believing stories that I was told, but I never investigated them. And then once you've done that, then what is your story? And please, if you're going to create your story, make yourself the central figure in it, and make it a story of fierce hope. And make yourself a catalyst for fierce hope.
It's a wonderful, wonderful way to end this, Joe. As I said, we're just about out of time. I want to thank Joe Weston, my dear friend, once again. His book, Fierce Civility. Let's face it, folks, this is the right book. It's at the right time, and this is absolutely the right author. Go get this book. Go get it today. If we want things to be better, it has to start by the person that we see in the mirror. Get this book. Now, you can see this show on Roku TV or on my YouTube channel, which is also called Frank Zakari. I will send links to Joe, and he will post it in all the places that he puts up all his information. If you use the YouTube channel, please subscribe. Now, let me leave you with this, as I do every week. None of us are in this alone. And the secret to walking on water is to know where the rocks are. And today's show, Joe showed us where many of those rocks are. Join us again next week for another life-altering event. Joe, thank you again.
Thank you, Frank. It's an honor to be here.